Hello and welcome to a special 3-part podcast series presented by Pavion to celebrate Women's History Month. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. In this series, we are highlighting the voices of women within the company who have overcome challenges and driven meaningful change. In each episode, you will hear from female employees at Pavion who will share personal stories of resilience and the humanitarian work that has shaped their careers. Plus, we'll talk about the women in history who have inspired them to keep pushing forward. And we are here to launch episode 2 in this series. So if you missed episode 1, you need to go back and watch that. But today we have our guests, Pamela Spencer, Michelle Strong, and Susan Post. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Looking forward to getting into the conversation, but I'd love for everybody to hear a brief bio from each of you if we can. Getting started, Pamela, starting with you.
Hi, my name is Pamela Spencer. I'm the assistant controller here at Pavion. I've been in accounting for 20 plus years, space in fire and security and other spaces as well, but that is primarily my background.
And Michelle.
I'm Michelle Strong. I've been with Pavion over 2 years now. I'm the Senior Director of Finance Integration. I have an accounting background, been the controller of large companies and small, but in this capacity, I'm helping with a lot of process improvement and system integrations.
And if you tune into episode 1, you saw Susan there, but Susan, still love to hear about your background if you can for people just tuning in.
Susan Post, Chief Integration Strategy Officer with Pavion. I've been here 3 years in the business, in the security business, 28 years. So it's a long time.
Yeah. So let's start off. We're talking about the bridge between history and today. What are some of the most significant contributions women have made in history that you would say continue to inspire change today?
I think for me, and you know, as you mentioned, Michelle, this is the second piece of the series, and for me, it's just the continued effort and the approach to making the world a better place, right? And how we contribute, whether it's to fulfillment around, you know, scientists and inventions and business. I think it's a pretty interesting environment right now.
I'll add on to that. I feel like as women, you know, we are juggling a lot of balls in the air. You know, we have our families, we have our careers, and we have the mindset of we just need to get it done. And I think, you know, not only in our personal lives, but also our professional lives, just really digging in, understanding what the need is and being able to accomplish what needs to be done to achieve the goals that we set for ourselves.
So with that in mind, what lessons can we learn from the achievements of some influential women? I'm going to get more specific and granular here. I know that each of you have someone in mind who maybe has been specifically an inspiration for you as you look past to their feats.
I think, you know, the first series I mentioned, the scientist Marie Curie, and when I left after having that podcast complete, I began to think about and reflect on that question. And you know, one of the individuals that I go back and you may have remembered me mentioning, it's about the little nuggets, right, that you pull out of your relationships and so on. And I started thinking about my 7th grade teacher, Miss Siderakis, which I will not spell for this. And she was an English literature teacher, and she had a way of going through the classics and stories and so on that made me think beyond the small town that I grew up in, right? And it gave me an opportunity to say, you know, that's interesting to me. There is an opportunity there for me. And I think when I reflect on that, I look back to that time period to say, it's about opportunity again, right? And what's in front of you and what you do to make that door open for all of your dreams.
And I think for me, one of the lessons learned is looking back at the history of Katherine Johnson. She worked for NASA for 33 years. And during that time, she broke not only gender, but race barriers. She was made famous in the recent movie Hidden Figures, where her and her team, they were called computers, but they really were female mathematicians. And just the leverage of their experience and their expertise and their knowledge and how smart they were. And all of that was kind of put to the wayside. But in recent years, we've learned what they contributed to the space race for the U.S., which was huge. Without them, that wouldn't have happened. So that inspiration of knowing that all of us as women in whatever area that we're in, whether it's science, technology, engineering, or even math, that we can do it and it is possible.
And the woman that I wanted to bring forth here is the woman who was behind the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. It came at a time where women didn't even have rights. They didn't have rights to vote. They didn't have a voice. And what ended up happening was her husband, who was in charge, he was the chief engineer of building that bridge, ended up getting the bends, and he was bedridden. And at that point in time, because she worked so closely with him, she ended up being the chief engineer herself, but could never, ever admit it. Because at that point in time, if anybody thought a female built the bridge, they wouldn't even walk across it. So it really rang true for me, thinking about, wow, anything is possible. I think no matter what you put your mind to, you could do anything. And she was able to complete the bridge. And then years later, finally get the recognition she deserved for completing it. But after that, also having a voice for women's rights and having women the ability to vote and have a voice in society. And I'm a big proponent of everybody having a voice. You want to surround yourself with people you can elevate and bring up. And a lot of times with women, I want to surround myself with rock stars, and I'd like to elevate them, and eventually they can take my place one day.
There's so much there. And, we've all kind of talked about some of the hurdles that some women in history have faced. Well, Susan, I know you had a unique approach with your teacher, which I think we can all agree. If we know any teachers have ever been a teacher, we know that they have their hardships in and of themselves with the job that they have in front of them. But I want to get a little deeper with regard to some of the challenges that women have historically faced and how they worked through them. Can you give me your thoughts there? Because, we touched on a few things, the fact that, Michelle, you just mentioned your pick not getting the credit that she deserved till years maybe after the fact. And we've heard that on a number of examples where maybe even posthumously we're just finding out what they've done. So what is your take on that of how many things and how many hurdles that some of those women in history saw, and then them being able to push through and make it on the other side?
Right. I think I go through life knowing that life isn't fair, right? And what we've seen in our history is these women were pioneers. They fought their way through it. They were, just as competent and smart as their male counterparts. And I think the perseverance that they showed is very inspiring to me. I think, you can't go through life thinking, I should have gotten credit for this or I shouldn't got credit for that. The credit is all of the knowledge that you've gained in that journey.
No, I really think that's a good liftoff. And I was thinking of this as well after the first series was, we talk about women in history and we talk about folks from the 1930s, 1940s, whatever, right? And there's still challenges today. We haven't overcome everything. And when we talk about obstacles, it's coming from the lens I come from, being in this organization, in this business for 28 years. Many times I've been the only female in a room, right? And that in itself lends itself to how do you command the attention or that you need to get your point across, and unfortunately that still happens today. So having the longevity in this business that I've had, it's critically important to me that I turn around and pull someone forward. And I just ask that everybody do that, because it is important, because there are still obstacles every day, whether you're a woman, a man, or whatever, right? There's obstacles every day, and you need someone to turn around and give you a helping hand at times to help you progress.
Yeah, and Katherine Johnson's memoir, she talked about that she was so humble in saying she was just doing her job, but she also recognized that she had mentors around her, because back then she didn't know what a mathematician was. I mean, that's basically what she was. And it wasn't just the female mentors that she had around her. At that time, it was the men mentors who really got her the visibility to where she was able to stand on her own and actually make those calculations, which were huge at the time. You think about saving someone's life, right? If your calculation is off by one digit, that could have meant John Glenn not coming back to earth again, right? So having that, having those mentors, whether you're male or female, I think is critical as we move forward with women and trying to champion women to move into roles that we know that we can do. We just need the opportunity to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And as we've just heard, these obstacles are not just women focused, right? We all have things in our life that can cause those speed bumps, or maybe even more. Something that comes to mind immediately, talking about change on the Hollywood set, quite different than what we're talking about from a business standpoint. But Kathy Bates just receiving an award for being a lead female in her 70s for a hit television show would never be seen a decade or two ago. So let's talk about how women can turn those barriers into opportunities for change and then progress.
I worked in we all do. We work in a male-dominated industry. And I worked at a place where the whole leadership team was Marines, ex-Marines, and they were all men. And I was the only female on that leadership team. And it was so interesting because at first I was kind of outside the bubble. And as soon as, I kind of dug in and really proved myself, it was almost like they came around and they surrounded me and then they helped elevate me. So there's, we were in a biometric industry, and again, being military, very male dominated, it was almost like a breath of fresh air, somebody had said to me, to have a woman in a leadership role that was able to kind of pull up other females into other leadership roles or managerial roles within the organization. And I just feel like, if you put your mind to it, it could be possible. And there are times where you do have to leverage your counterparts around you. But it's experiences like that, as I progress through my career and I do get older, I used to be the young kid on the block. To your point, times are changing, and with us getting older, we have that level of experience. Now, all of a sudden, I look at people who are coming into the organization that may be a little bit younger, and they don't have the benefit of experience. And I feel like it's our job to help them navigate their career and elevate them to get to a place where we can. And then it's not so different. It's not weird having a 70-year-old female win an award anymore. Now it's the norm.
Well, I think it's funny, right? And like I said, you reflect when you do these type of things. That you always reflect, right, as to what your history and your story was. And going back, and it was one of the first times I was promoted to a general manager, and I was in an organization that would have Club Excellence every year, and happened to be the first year that I won General Manager of the Year. I was the first female to win in the organization, and for whatever reason, my table, when they announced me, my table was way in the back, and I had to walk up front. And I remember walking down the middle of the room, and as I was walking down, all I heard folks say was, "It's a girl, right?" And that has stuck with me my whole career, because I could still hear the voice. But it's those things, and those are the obstacles you overcome, because I came up through operations, and there weren't females in operations, and to still hear that voice in the back of my head, it's still pretty funny and rewarding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I also think that giving each other space to be able to come to that table. I remember when I joined an FP&A team that was all men. And so coming into that group, being a woman, I was very shy. I was quiet. They were very boisterous in their opinions. And I was kind of a little bit like, why is everyone yelling, right? Why? But that was their way of communicating. That was their way of communicating. And my way of communicating was a little more reserved. I did a lot of listening, but they made it comfortable. My manager made it comfortable in that he wanted my opinion, because it was very different than everyone else's. And again, surrounding yourself with mentors and managers like that. And not only do you take that for yourself, but also for newbies coming in, like Michelle was mentioning, we should be doing that to mentor others, because they're going to be where we are one day. And we want this to continue, but it should be across the platform, to where we give everyone an opportunity to have a voice at the table, because everyone's voice is important.
And a strong leader will solicit those type of opinions, right? Multiple opinions and feedback, because that's what makes a strong business.
Absolutely.
So let's put this into action. What steps can individuals and communities take to support women in becoming influential leaders?
It's about inclusiveness, right? To look across the table, invite to the table, and when you do get invited, ask the question, participate, and be a voice, right? And be a voice for those that you're going to help once you get into the role that you wanted to bring the next generation along. I think it's being comfortable in your own skin and being collaborative.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that. Is surround yourself with people who have different strengths than you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so, I love being collaborative. I certainly don't want to pretend that I know everything. So I really love to surround myself with people who have different points of view or different opinions. And some we may agree with, some we may not, but it's always good to have a healthy debate. And I think people shy away from some, positive, what I'll call positive conflict. Having these discussions and vetting things out, you may not land in the same place, but I think it's okay, right? I think it's okay for all of us to have a voice, to have an opinion, and then, we work it out amongst each other. So I would definitely say surrounding yourself with people with different opinions, not necessarily all the same opinions.
Yeah, and I would say for those who are in leadership, and when you do have that round table of folks at the table, make sure that you're letting everyone get a chance to be heard. Because sometimes it's not, when you have, some people who talk more than others and some who do a lot of listening more than others, you want to make sure that there's an even keel of how everyone is represented and make sure that everyone's opinion is actually heard at the table.
Any final thoughts as we're wrapping up here?
For me, it's I hope everybody finds these little podcasts helpful, and it helps you get to know all of us better too, right? And what we do. We're a sizable organization now, and it's just, I think it's important to know where the opportunities lie and how we can be of help.
Yeah, and I would just encourage anybody, whatever you put your mind to, whether you're a man or a woman, anybody, anything's possible. Like that's kind of, I approach everything in life that I'll figure it out, and I will. Yeah. I'll figure it out. And so giving the people, giving your coworkers, giving the confidence that they need to be able to get there.
And I would just close out by saying this isn't just a one-time event. This is ongoing, right? So although we're celebrating these women in history and what they have done and kind of pioneered for us, we should be thinking about it every day.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing experience to challenge each other and to learn from each other. And that's the reason we're doing this podcast series, right? So I want to thank all of you for being here today. Pamela Spencer, Michelle Strong, and Susan Post. It's been a great conversation again. So appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And I want to thank all of you for listening to today's episode of our Women's History Month series. This is part 2. Once again, if you have not watched or listened to part 1, we highly encourage you to do so. We hope you have been inspired by the stories of strength and perseverance shared by our amazing women. Be sure to check out the next and final episode in this series, where we will continue celebrating the individual women who make a difference every day. Thanks again for joining us. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. We hope to connect with you on another podcast soon.